Thank you. Minister Lee, on the exotic dancers temporary policy, were you able to sit down with the owners, or are the permits being processed already?
Some of the permits that were received in the past, as per court order, we took them in, and decisions have been rendered on those permits. As a matter of fact, we just met yesterday with the legal advisor from the club owners, as well as, I think 8 or 9 of the clubs yesterday. They have some concerns, some discussion points about their industry and what some of the impacts might be. And I think there's a number of points we've agreed that we will take a look at it. Some of those are really actually business issues that are related to any business. For example, if you bring in a person and you apply for a work permit for them, you pay the work permit fee for them, and if that person decides to leave after a week, that expense is an expense that the business has to bear. And so is there a possibility, for example, of a credit being offered? And those are things that we said we'd take a look at, but it's actually something that would be a policy for all businesses. It's an issue that all businesses actually have. It's just, I think, the nature of their business. They may have a higher turnover, and they may have more people that have a tendency to leave. So those are questions that we said we would take a look at. And there's a couple other issues, and actually their legal advisor was supposed to meet with representatives from government to try and work out a couple other points for discussion, and then we'll come back to it. But we have met. I think, again, the conversation's open, it's constructive, and we'll see what's possible within the scope of the law.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Andrew, Alida, you have the floor.
Thank you, Cedric. Prime Minister, the voters list, do you have an idea of how many registered voters they are ahead of the nomination day on Monday?
No, I have not received the accurate information from the census office. But that information, of course, is there, but I have not received it.
On the Integrity Chamber law, the last time you spoke about it, the Legal Affairs Department was looking into the actual verdict from the Constitutional Court to render an advice to the Council of Ministers. What is the situation now?
Still no advice from them as yet. Actually, by the 15th of August, the present head of the Legal Affairs Department, Mr. Jules de Vries, will be returning to the Netherlands. In the meantime, he has taken up his vacation days, so there has already been a shortage of personnel at the Legal Affairs Department, and with the head leaving, it puts even a larger strain. With the amount of legislation that is coming from the different ministries, VSA has legislation in preparation, Education has quite some legislation in preparation, and so is the Justice Ministry. TIAT has, so across the board, there's quite some legislation, documentation in preparation. And in this one, it's an added, if you want to say, burden, in the sense that it is the ordinance as such was rejected, and we have told them to review the court's decision and chart a way forward at arriving at a new draft, so to speak. So it is not something, again, that you would say, well, there is one coming this week, next week, or next month.
On electoral reform, Parliament is scheduled to restart its sessions as of next week. Has there been a date yet set for your draft ordinance?
No, a date has not yet been set, but this week, the adjustments that we have made and the answers that we have given, or that we will provide to the concerns both the Kingdom government has had, as well as the local Council of Advice. Those will be submitted this week to Parliament so that the debate can continue. In the meantime, our technical people, our civil servants, have had 2 phone conferences with their counterparts, so to speak, in the Netherlands. Personally, I've also met with the Secretary General of the Ministry of Interior, and, you know, it was not a formal meeting to discuss this, but this is one of the things that was broached. And then it became clear to me as to, for instance, why you had certain formulations and or certain questions posed by them. One of the things that I've always said is that a challenge within the kingdom is that you have one kingdom and you have one kingdom government, but you have a diversity in the way the problems manifest themselves in the different parts of the kingdom, and therefore you cannot have one cure for all of the problems. The drug problem, as it affects us in St. Martin, is different to how it is experienced in the Netherlands. Job security is different. And in this case, moving from one party to the other is an issue in the Netherlands. But one of the things, for instance, that I questioned was, how do you want me to explain, how do you determine who has stayed with the party? And for me, it was like a ridiculous remark, because if you have a two-man faction and one has left, whether he or she was the leader or not, but if you left, then you left. So whoever stayed is the one that stayed with the party. But it turns out that in the Netherlands, there has been an ongoing battle in a two-man faction in which both were accusing each other of not towing the party line and not towing the party vision, and each one of them told the other one, you should leave. No, not me, you should leave, not me, you should leave. So it was a back and forth to the point where one is threatening to throw the other one out of the party, and the other one is threatening to throw. And we are saying, no, that is not something that we have here. And if you have a party, there is a party leader, and if the party leader wants to leave, then he has left. The party leader can't say, I am leaving with my party. The party is here. You were elected on that party, and you cannot, and this is where we draw the line, for instance. If you leave, you are no longer a member of that faction, a member of that party. But as long as you stay, if the two of them stay and fight and bicker, then the two of them remain part of the party, and the party would have a split vote on something. One is in favor of changing the Constitution, let's say, and one is not in favor of changing the Constitution. But we don't have a system where the party gets together and say, well, we don't like how William Ireland is voting, so we are throwing him out of the party. There is no throwing out. You're elected in the faction, and you have a right to remain there for 4 years, and if you opt to leave, then you have walked away from, if you want to call it, the benefits or the advantages that you derive from being a member of a party or being a member of a faction. Cedric, with the indulgence of the media, there are two issues that I wanted to address. I know when I came, there was no opening statement. I arrived late for that. But in the meantime, in the interim, it came back up to me. There are quite some concerns, or some concerns being raised or stirred up by some people, that government should be cautious with the demolition of the Prince William Alexander School. As you would know, last week we had the groundbreaking there to mark the reconstruction of the school, and at that time it was announced that we would totally flatten the school. Everything would be demolished, and a new school will be rebuilt in several phases, and phase one was announced what phase one was, and it included, I think, 8 classrooms. Ever since, but there also mention was made of one of the hazards discovered at the school was asbestos, and that would be removed in a responsible way. The advice to sign off on will be discussed, will be signed off on in the course of this week. And because of the system being down, FBB did not complete the work on it. But a group from outside, experts are being brought in to assist in the removal and safe safe removal and disposal of the asbestos. So there are those, of course, who would like to create sensation. Of course, people, it is their right to be concerned and to question government as to, are things being done the right way? Yes, things will be done the right way, and a complete breakdown on how it will be done will be provided shortly in terms of what to expect, what not to expect. But it's not a situation where, the people of St. Peter's now need to be worried because asbestos will be flying all over St. Peter's, and if you walk anywhere in the vicinity of the school, you're likely to succumb to cancer, any other disease. Absolutely not. That is not the case. Another decision the government has taken in its meeting yesterday, and in the absence of the Minister of Romi, I think it's good news to share with the people that just before Carnival, we had announced that temporary repairs to Front Street would be carried out in order to facilitate Carnival, and immediately thereafter we would begin with the permanent upgrade of Front Street and Back Street. That project was approved. Well, the project was approved, but now we have signed off on the start of phase 1 of that project, which would be Back Street. Since Front Street already underwent temporary repairs, and you can drive up Front Street now without any discomfort, but Back Street, in a discussion this week, we were saying, well, it's the worst road on St. Martin, and somebody said, no, Mr. Marlin, not a worst road in St. Martin, a worst road in the Caribbean. If you really want to have a horrible experience, drive down Back Street. So we are tackling Back Street as the first in the project of Front and Back Street, and we hope to start very soon. So the contractor will be given the assignment to begin. It is not just fixing the road, but sewage lines that needed removal and or upgrading and or repair will be tackled as well. I think certain places, certain cabling will go in, so you can expect to see the start of that project very soon, and this is one of the things that was part of this coalition government as well.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. And of course, Leader, thank you for your questions in this round.
You're still by Hilbert.
Because I
Oh, you're leaving? Okay.
One question.
Just for the next section. Okay, go ahead.
a question for Minister Lee about the prostitution sector. I would think that there is a distinct difference between exotic dancers and prostitutes. My question is, since the court case, you have received a request for work permits. Have you issued any for exotic dancers and any for prostitutes to come and work here?
As I mentioned, we received a number of applications that we were instructed to take in. The position from the Ministry of Labor is we do not give permits for sex workers. We give permits for exotic dancers and for enamir mages. There were some applications, for example, that had labor agreements as sex workers. All of those were sent back and they're given an opportunity now to reform their applications based on, we believe that it's fair given the amount of time that this has been in discussions, that those were sent back and saying, as submitted, they're not acceptable. So they need to reform those.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Hilbert. Bibi, you have the floor.
Thank you. Prime Minister Marlene, can you tell me directly, after the information given from the Kingdom government on the amendment with the Constitution regarding election reform, you had mentioned, I believe, that the government was thinking about adding a statement or something like that, or a line to Article 39 of the Constitution in a way to try to curb the ship jumping issue. Have you gotten any way close to that, or just Monday's was solution day? If you remember clearly, after the decision from the Kingdom Council, you made a statement, you said that there was another option government was thinking about?
It's not clear to me what exactly your reference is.
I'm talking
I
about-
probably explained what it is we are trying to achieve, but there was no change that no fundamental change that we were making. I probably explained how the sentence of the extra article that we were putting in, because what you have now is, and I've explained this many times, what you have is the unwritten rule of how the formation takes place. And the impression that is created is that ministers are appointed by the governor. That's where you go to take the oath. And it's like the governor appoints the formateur, and the formateur selects a cabinet and submits the names after they were screened to the governor. That is the formal process. But how do we arrive there? It is not that the formateur goes around or puts an announcement in the papers, I'm looking for a prime minister, I'm looking for a minister of finance, I'm looking for. On a side note, after I've just mentioned the prime minister, the minister of finance just now, I don't know if it was said at the opening, but the minister of finance is out of the hospital. He was at home, went home yesterday, and he should be leaving the island for further medical treatment on Thursday. Not that he is in any critical condition, he's dying or anything. He has an appointment for a follow-up, so he might be off island starting tomorrow. So that's just a side note. So to get back to it, there is no application for positions as minister. There is a political declaration that is always signed, a political declaration between the coalition partners, whether it is two parties, whether it is like in this case, we have 5 factions supporting this government. We have 3 parties and 2 independent members, so we have 5 factions supporting the government. In that political agreement, it is stated the National Alliance will appoint these ministers. The Democratic Party will appoint this minister. This party, this individual, this faction will. So that is where it starts. You need support in order to make it to the next round. So it is not the formateur who goes out there along with the governor and put it together. The Constitution requires that you take the oath before the governor. And what we are building in it is the nomination for the person to be appointed minister has to be supported by one or more political parties that have a majority. That is what the essence of it is. And the difference of opinion with the government, with the Council of Advice and or the advice from the Kingdom government is that we are turning those who leave their party into second-class members of parliament because we are taking away their right. And we are saying, no, we are not taking away anybody's right. You were elected as a member of a party. You could not, like right now, no new parties can be added to the electoral process for this election. So even if 1, 2, or 3 parties are formed, now they cannot take part in the election because there's a legal requirement to be registered. So you need to belong to a political party to participate in the election. So if you're part of a party and you leave, you left, the party can't throw you out. You left the party. So by leaving, you forfeit the right that the party has to support the nomination of ministers to arrive at a government. Why have we chosen that way? Because that is how we feel we can curb what, is referred to as the ship jumping and what causes us to have governments every year or every 2 years since 2010. Now, that is our solution to our problem. That is the way I see it. And if the Dutch feel that they can't solve their problem that way, that is for their account and for their accord. And that, I think, is what is a pity, that in functioning within a kingdom, not enough attention is given or allowed to be given for the specific approaches and the specific problems that each country would have. And in my discussion with them, my thing is, so if it is good for, if a solution is good for Holland, then it has to be good for the kingdom. And then in essence, the answer would be yes. Because Holland decides, and there is no control over the kingdom government outside of the Netherlands. So it isn't that before the kingdom government makes a decision that there is a kingdom parliament in which all of us have representation and can voice our opinion. The only voices that the kingdom government listens to are the voices of the Dutch parliament, and none of us are elected to the Dutch parliament, and they don't seek any votes or support from the people of St. Martin. So that is one of the, the typical democratic deficit that exists in the constellation that we are part of.
All right, Prime Minister, I'm going to throw the question. Either you or Minister Lee can answer it. My colleague just asked about the fire on the dump, and I heard the explanation, but what I didn't hear Minister Lee or anybody saying is that we have had, not only at the dump, but even with the garbage collection, proven that there is sabotage. This morning I'm told that fire was purposely lit on the dump. As a Minister of Health who is so concerned about what's taking place at the dump, how do you, what advice or what do you plan to do into getting people that are, purposefully or willfully lighting fires at the dump? How do you intend to tackle this?
If the Prime Minister wants to chime in, but, look, part of the terms of reference, as I told you, there's 2 points that I've taken a look at as Minister. Number one is the terms of reference. Part of the terms of reference includes security and controls at the dump. So it relates to, what type of materials can be dumped where, but it also has to do with who has access to the dump physically, right? Because there's a risk. Some of the fires, I understood historically, were started from people who are coming looking for copper wires. So they pile them up and then they set it on fire to burn off the insulation so they can take the copper to sell. Now, and I haven't mentioned it, I saw a message that says it looks as if it's tires on fire. I didn't mention it because I haven't seen it myself and I don't like to spread melee, but if it is tires are something that are not so easy to catch on fire, which is something what you've spoken about, that it does, if that's the case, you certainly would have to suspect that there's some form of sabotage, because And the worst part is the tires look like they're all aggregated in a certain area of the dump. So, again, from my perspective, it's the terms of reference of which security in terms of how the dump is contained and how it's actually being managed. And then the second part is to make sure that if there is a fire, it's extinguished as quickly as possible. And that's where I think sometimes outside expertise would help. We aren't the only country in the world that has problems with fires at dumps.
All right, again, I'll follow up on another question that my colleague posed. You said when he asked you about sex workers, if permits were issued to sex workers or even exotic dancers after the court ruling, you said that you asked, because of the time span in between, you asked some of the applicants to redo their applications because in there they had stated, I believe, that they were sex workers. Are we saying that we are now going to create a loophole and tell the people who write that we're going to be dancers, but in fact they're sex workers? Because you said you give them some time to modify their application. So what are we telling them to do?
Look, understand the issue became an issue regarding human trafficking, right? So if you have an employment agreement between an employer and a worker, and the job description says your job is to provide sexual services in exchange for a salary, right? It means that there's a relationship where the employer can say you must do something sexual even if it's against your will. And that is very much in line with the idea of human trafficking, which the government cannot condone or support or facilitate. So our perspective is if you want to come in as an exotic dancer, that's permissible, and what you choose to do of your own free will is between you and another individual.